Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I am here with my final review from this year's Booker Prize. But before I get into that, I just want to point out that you've probably noticed I am not in my usual filming location. I am traveling for work this week and I didn't pack a camera, I didn't pack my ring light, I didn't pack my tripod. I, for some reason, thought that I had an extra week for the Booker announcement to be made, and I realized that I will actually be flying home the day of the announcement. So I don't have any way of getting home to get my stuff prior to that announcement being made, so we're gonna have to kind of wing it. These videos are going to be a little primitive. So I have this one to film, and then I also have my Booker predictions list that I'll have to do on the road, but we're going to get through this. So I apologize for the lighting. I'm sure the sound is terrible as well. And also it's probably going to be lightly edited because I left my personal laptop at home that has my editing software. So we're going to have to do best with what I can edit on my phone, and yeah, we're just gonna deal with it. So apologies ahead of time, but thank you for sticking around. Now, let's talk about the book. So I'm going to be talking about Playground by Richard Powers. Now, first and foremost, I read another Richard Powers book earlier this year. I read Bewilderment. It was the first book by him that I had ever read, and I got along with that book pretty well. There were a couple complaints that I had about it, but it was an enjoyable story, and I did end up really having a decent time with that. Now, I will say that Playground I enjoyed much better. This is definitely for me a step up for the enjoyment level that I had with Bewilderment, and I'm really glad that I read this because there were a lot of parts of it that I really ended up enjoying, and I think that it is definitely a book that if it sounds like something interesting to you by the end of this review or any of the other reviews that you have seen out there, I definitely would say give this one a chance because it might surprise you. Now, this book was interesting to me for a couple of different reasons, and I'll talk about those and then kind of get into some of the plot points. The first thing that was interesting to me is that this book kind of has four main characters, and I really like when we have books that have really strong characters that are upfront and really heavy in the story. And I also love when those characters somehow converge throughout the duration of the book. And, you know, it could be throughout the book, but then sometimes you have those instances where they all come together at the end. And this is one of those books where you get both sides of that. You have characters that you understand the correlation very early on, and then later toward the end, the ones that haven't, whose paths haven't crossed yet, come together at last. And I really did enjoy that. And also, this story is really unique, and I kept trying to kind of wrap my head around how the story and the subplots that were happening would ultimately bring all of these characters together. And I had a lot of ideas throughout, and I will say that there were parts of this book's ending that were truly shocking to me. I did not see some of them coming. Some of them were a little predictable, and if you pay really close attention throughout, I'm sure you could pick up on all of them. I picked up on some of them, and there were some that I would maybe even potentially want to do a reread of this to see if there were clues there that I just missed or didn't see originally that would have explained it or helped me predict the ending. But yeah, I really enjoyed the fact that not only did the characters come together, but it was in a very unexpected way for me. I feel like as readers, especially if you're an avid reader and you're reading lots and lots of books, sometimes it feels like we've read it all and we've seen it all, and it's difficult to surprise us. And I really love when books can actually surprise you and give you kind of that gasp moment. And this was one that really did that for me. And the other thing that I liked about this book was the setting. And we have Richard Powers, who is very involved in the fight for our climate and our planet. And this book was very heavily focused on that and nature, especially the sea, which is where this book takes place for a part of it. And we focus on an island, and there is just so much nature in it. And there is a lot of things that I learned throughout the duration of this book about marine and aquatic life, and I was just really impressed with that type of writing. I love nature writing in general, and to learn about different creatures and different species, it was really fun. And it's one of those books, and you've heard me say this a million times on my channel, I love when books give me just enough information to want to go and seek out more. And this book did that for me. So what is this book about? So basically we have 4 main characters, but it all starts on an island, and that island is called Makatea, and it is in French Polynesia. It's like smack dab in the middle of the Pacific. And this island, they are not an island that is necessarily thriving. There are about 80 some residents there, and earlier in Makatea's history, they were used by a lot of different countries throughout the world as a source for phosphate. So phosphate is a key ingredient in fertilizer, and it had abundant resources there, so it was mined. And once the resources started to fade, the heyday of Makatea started to fall and decline, and right now they don't have a lot of the essential resources that a lot of communities need to thrive. They don't have a hospital, they don't have a school, they don't have a lot of money, and they kind of suffer for that. So they are approached by a tech billionaire that wants to basically use the island for seasteading purposes. So to basically create this floating city off of the coast of Makatea, and it is going to bring in lots of money, and it's going to be able to give them all of the things that they need in order to step up their current living situation and the quality of their lives. And of course, if they move forward with becoming a site for a seasteading community, that is going to mean that there are a lot more people there. It's going to mean that a lot of the resources that they have are going to continually be depleted. It's going to change the scenery. It's going to basically potentially cause a lot of harm to the island as well as good, with all of the financial aspects coming in. They have to weigh whether or not they want to do that. So at the core of the story, we have this island and that ultimate decision that the residents have to make. And then we start to learn about specific characters. So we have Ina. Ina is a resident of Makatea, and the story kind of opens one day with her, and she's on the beach with her children, and they find this bird that is in flight, and all of a sudden it falls to the ground and it is dead, and they start to see that it is basically full of plastic. So we know very early on that this book is going to talk a lot about our climate and the way that we treat our planet. And then we kind of move to a very, very different setting, which is Chicago, and we meet Todd, and he is a child at the time. He's very young. We learn that Todd is very privileged. He comes from a wealthy family, and he is going to this elite prep school. And then we meet another character by the name of Rafi, and Rafi is a Black boy, and he is living in the south side of Chicago, where we have Todd, who is living on the north side, the more wealthier side. And Rafi is highly intelligent, and his intelligence gets him some notice, and he is able to start going to that same school that Todd is going to, and they become friends very quickly. They are very different in their socioeconomic worlds, but they're very similar in the sense that they're super intelligent, and they both love board games, and they love, mind games and riddles and chess, and they play Go, and they are very much in tune with each other and using their minds. And Rafi is also kind of more of a poet and likes the literary aspect of the world. And then you have Todd, where he is kind of the opposite. He is more into science and technology. And we learn a lot about their lives together, the friendship that they develop. And then we also meet our fourth character. Her name is Evie, and she is a marine biologist. And we learn very early on about her life from a young age. She was actually one of, if not the first, that had used the aqualung that was invented by Jacques Cousteau. And from a very young age, she had a love of the ocean, and she basically dedicated her entire life to the study of the sea. And you kind of wonder how all four of those characters will eventually come together and merge. And it's very interesting how it all ends up panning out. We're talking about nature, we're talking about technology, and the one other thing that makes the story very interesting is that we have Todd, who at the beginning of the story, we learn very early on that he, as an adult, I think he's in his 50s at the time, is diagnosed with a rare form of dementia that is basically eating away at his memories and taking his life from him very, very quickly. And Todd has some regrets that we learn about throughout the duration of the book, and we eventually kind of learn exactly what those regrets are, how it has impacted the people in his life, and ultimately how he intends on making up for those wrongs that he did throughout the duration of his life. And at the end of the day, I don't want to talk too much more about plot because I don't want to give away any of the twists, but I really enjoyed how this book came together. And another part that I really liked about this book was that dichotomy between your natural sciences and technology, and how we progressed and how sometimes we have been so dependent on technology, and part of why our world is crumbling around us is because of technology. But can technology be a way for us to get our planet back? And I really liked reading about that. And I know this book isn't going to capture everyone's attention, and it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but like I said, if any of those things sounded all interesting to you, give the book a chance. I will also say that if you are at all interested in the marine sciences, Evie's section alone of this book, hers by far was my favorite. I just was fascinated and so invested in her entire story. Remember, she was the marine biologist, and I just found her story so great. We learn about her being a woman, being a French Canadian woman back in, I believe it was the 50s, but her trying to get her life up and running, and her trying to get educated in a world that was dominated by men, and her kind of trying to make a case for herself. She was more qualified than any of the men that she was competing against, but you know how things were back then. It just wasn't a fair and equal place for women. So this book also had a lot of feminism in it, as well, as we see or saw Evie break through that glass ceiling and be able to do the things that she loves and do it better than men. And that was a really fun storyline for me to read. And as far as how this book compares to some of the other ones on the long list, I don't think that this book is good enough to have made the short list, but I will say I did enjoy this book better than some of the ones that ended up on the short list. I enjoyed this more than Held. I enjoyed this more than Creation Lake, but at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily feel like a Booker book to me. I think that he has a track record with the Booker, and the subjects that he writes about are very relevant, and I think that sometimes that is something that the judges look at whenever they're determining books. They want those books that are about relevant topics and things that we are dealing with in our current environment or our current world, and he definitely has a book that is at the front of everybody's thoughts when it comes to the future of our world. And I think that that's likely how this book made it on to the long list, I should say. But yeah, it wasn't the worst book. It wasn't my favorite, but I did enjoy my time with it. And yeah, so that is my review. And once again, I thank you for sticking around. I know I have probably rambled, and because I'm not going to be able to edit too much, I hope this isn't terribly long, but thank you so much for sticking around, and until we read again, bye.